Hi everyone, this is Diana. I'm here with Contigo Wellness. We have a special guest today here for our 30-day wellness challenge, Dr. Elizabeth Jarquin. She's an LMFT, licensed therapist, mental health and wellness advocate, and public speaker. She holds a PhD in family therapy and has 5 years of experience in the mental health field, in which she has provided individual, family, and group therapy. She's also supervised clinicians, co-ran school-based mental health group. Dr. Jarquin has also published, presented locally, nationally, and internationally on topics related to relationships, culturally appropriate services for minority populations, wellness, and mental health in the schools. Her areas of clinical research interests include the development and provision of culturally responsive care and services for the Latinx immigrant community in the United States. Dr. Jarquin also specializes in the treatment of stress, anxiety, and burnout. So we're super excited to have her. Currently, she provides virtual coaching to individuals who are experiencing stress, anxiety, and burnout. Through wellness check-ins and planning, she offers tools for burnout relief and to decrease stress and anxiety. Her work is grounded in 2 evidence-based approaches: mindfulness-based stress reduction and solution-focused approaches. Dr. Jarquin also continues to write and speak about topics related to mental health, wellness, and the Latinx immigrant community in the United States. So welcome, Dr. Jarquin. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Diane. I'm excited to be here. Yes, thank you. So the title of my presentation is Sin Papeles, the Experiences of Undocumented Immigrants in the United States. And as the title suggests, what I'm going to talk to you about today is the experience of undocumented immigrants who are living here in the United States. This is our introduction. Diana did a wonderful job telling you a little bit about myself, but just very briefly, again, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist who is living and practicing in Florida. I received my PhD from Nova Southeastern University, where my dissertation focused on the experiences of undocumented immigrants in the United States. So what I did is that I interviewed undocumented immigrants to understand the impact of an undocumented status, not only on themselves, but on their family members, and to examine if they were also impacted by the current socio-political climate and immigration policies. Thank you, Diana. To give you a little bit of background information, the United States has the largest immigrant population in the world. So it is the #1 country for having immigrants. And the Latinx population is the largest group of immigrants in the United States, both documented and undocumented. According to recent statistics, the Latinx population reaches nearly 58 million, which makes up approximately 18% of the total population. Historically, Mexicans were one of the largest subgroups of Latinx immigrants in the United States. However, that's changing. In the past decade, the number of immigrants from Mexico have declined, while the number of Central American immigrants have increased. In recent years, there has been an escalation of debates around immigration, which has resulted in a shifting immigration climate and policies. Throughout his term, Donald Trump has made changes to existing policies and has enacted new ones that negatively impact individual and family experiences, as they make it harder for immigrants to come to the United States in a legal way, change their status once they're here, and threaten family separation. Examples are detention of asylum seekers, threat of mass deportation raids, increase for funding of the wall at the border, an increase in citizenship and immigration services fees, and now a new fee for asylum seekers, and the use of armed tactical forces to arrest immigrants. I just want to give a little bit of context. So for my research study, I interviewed undocumented immigrants who are living here in the United States. So it's important to keep in mind that these individuals currently have an undocumented status. So what I did is that I interviewed each of them individually. The interviews lasted from an hour to an hour and a half, and I talked about various aspects of their lives, and I also asked about their family members. So after reviewing the interviews, there were 4 major themes that were present in every single conversation, and those were limited opportunities and restrictions, fear of deportation, increased racism and xenophobia, and coping strategies. These themes were not only experienced by the individuals I interviewed, but their family members as well. So I want to highlight that regardless of legal status, so let's say a family member is a US citizen or maybe is a permanent legal resident, has a visa, etc., no matter what their status was, they also felt the effects of their undocumented family member. And I will get into that now. Next. So what does this mean for the community? What I found is that an undocumented status not only impacts the undocumented individual, but impacts their families as well. And something that I thought was very interesting and noteworthy is that it didn't only affect their immediate family members, so the people who they live with here in the United States, but these effects crossed borders. So what they did is that they ended up impacting their families back home as well. Undocumented individuals and their families experience challenges, restrictions, and limited opportunities, all because of their status. So what this means is that they don't have the same opportunities as United States citizens or those with a documented status and face restrictions because of it. Examples are restrictions in terms of employment, health cares, let's say in terms of purchasing a car insurance, things of that nature. And so what this did is that this results in negative mental health effects for undocumented individuals and their families. They experience constant fear. So they're constantly in their everyday life fearful. What they do is that they fear deportation, either of themselves or of a family member. So an undocumented individual, they're constantly thinking about what's going to happen if I'm deported, and they're scared, and their family members, again, regardless if they're citizens, not citizens, they're also experiencing that fear because of their close connection to their family member. What they also do is that they fear family separation. So I spoke with some individuals who were parents, and they thought a lot about their children and what would happen to their children if they left. I also spoke to young adults, and same thing, they feared being separated from their families and thought about what would happen to them if they were to be deported. So aside from this fear, they also experienced a lot of uncertainty. So uncertainty about their own future, but also the future of their family. So not knowing what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to their families, what their life is going to be like in this country, if they're ever going to change their status or not. So a lot of uncertainty. In addition, they also spoke about fears of what could happen to their children, what could happen to them if they were deported. So some of them brought up the negative effects that it would have on the relationship with their children, and they feared that maybe their children would grow up without them, not knowing when they were going to come back. What could happen to the father, son, or mother, daughter, etc., parent-child relationship? Because research has shown that, unfortunately, they are negative effects. So this is something that the participants kept in mind. Aside from that, there were other participants who feared being killed once they were sent back, and they even said that it's like they were going to be sent back to their death. What I also found is that undocumented individuals and their family members experienced anxiety because they are constantly worried about what can happen to them and their families. Aside from this, an undocumented status also has an impact on the family dynamic. So what I mean by this is that this leads families to either come closer together or it creates conflict. And the reason is because families are very worried about what can happen. And one participant described it as not knowing when their last day together would be, because if they're deported, then they can't be together anymore. So what that did is that made them truly value each other, their relationships, their time together. So that brought them closer together. On the other hand, for other families, And undocumented status created a lot of frustration, and there's a lot of misunderstanding because family members want others to change their status, but they didn't understand that there's a lot of roadblocks and that it's a lengthy and difficult process. And so what that did is that created conflict with those family members. To talk more about the undocumented immigrant experience, participants mentioned that in recent years, they have noticed an increase in racism, discrimination, and xenophobia. And I want to take a second to explain what xenophobia is. Xenophobia is a dislike or prejudice against a person or groups of people from other countries. So let's say that I'm American born and I see someone that is from Canada or from Australia, China, any other country, and I dislike them and treat them badly because they're from another country, not from America. So that's xenophobia. And the participants said that they believe that there is a growing anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States because of the president's anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies. So this has led participants to experience feelings of criminalization, exclusion, marginalization, not belonging, and not having a voice. What participants described is that they feel like if they are criminals simply because they have an undocumented status. So what that means is that they feel like others around them perceive them as criminals and they themselves feel bad just because of their status. What they also mentioned is that they feel excluded, marginalized, and if they don't belong simply because they're from another country. So they've mentioned that they've had certain looks, certain comments, and they feel like they can't do certain things or go to certain places because they are going to be treated differently or badly because they're from another country and because of their status and how they look. Participants also noted that immigrants and immigration are hot topics right now. And although these are topics that are widely debated, their voices are not heard. So the voices of politicians and policymakers, those are the ones that we typically hear, but not the ones who are directly impacted, which are immigrants and their families. The participants mentioned that they not only feel voiceless, but they also feel like they're being silenced. Oftentimes, they are unable to share their voices because it is tied to the risk of disclosure of status, which means other people finding out that they're undocumented, and deportation. So because of this, they feel voiceless, invisible, disconnected, and isolated. They're afraid of speaking up. So we're talking a lot about the negative effects that an undocumented status, the current political climate, and immigration policies have on undocumented individuals, but I do want to highlight that there are some positives, and something that stood out to me during my interviews with participants was their resilience. Resilience is a notable characteristic in the Latinx culture, which has been widely documented across different fields and mediums. The Latinx community's resilience shone through in their adaptation to current times and the development of new strategies to cope with present challenges. Examples of coping strategies they created were conversing and processing, using humor, increased motivation to be successful, increased political engagement, and challenging the anti-immigrant rhetoric. To begin, when I say conversing and processing, what I mean is that what families did is that now they talk about what's going on. So because of their status and because of the current socio-political climate and immigration policies, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, but what they did is that they turned to each other, and what they do is that they talk about their struggles, they talk about their fears, and they process these things together. So they turn to each other as a source of support. In terms of humor, I found that what individuals and families do is that they try to make light of the situation. So the very real, harsh reality of being deported is something very scary. But what I found that some individuals did is that they started to joke around about it. For example, one participant, she has children, and she said that when they would get into the car, she would say, "Oh, put on your seatbelt because if we get stopped, I'm going to be deported." So for some people, maybe that's kind of shocking. But what using humor does is that it makes light of a very heavy situation, and it also normalizes it so that it's not so scary anymore and it's something manageable. Increased motivation to be successful. So a lot of these individuals and families, what they did is that they're very realistic about what's going on, about their very difficult situation, but they use this as a motivator to push them to do more. So to push them to work harder, to save money, to be able to provide an education and other things to their children. So instead of being almost like caught in a rut and being upset about what's going on, they used it as a driving force to just continue fighting harder. And again, another example of their resilience. In terms of increased political engagement, they are very upset about what is currently being said about immigrants and how immigrants are being portrayed. But what they're doing is that, again, they're using that to fuel their fire. So what they're doing is that they're attending protests, they're reaching out to the community and educating them. Those that can vote are voting. So they are doing something about it. They're being proactive. And finally, challenging the anti-immigrant rhetoric. So whenever they're having conversations with others and they hear that there's an anti-immigrant rhetoric, they challenge that by speaking about themselves, what they're doing, what their families are doing, and they show a different reality, their reality of what immigrants are really like, what their lives are like, and what they're adding to this country. So what can you do? There are a lot of ways that you can support both documented and undocumented immigrants. So one way that you can help is to donate to organizations that advocate for immigrants, including local and national immigrant rights groups, refugee resettlement agencies, and legal service providers. Additionally, there are organizations that provide aid to immigrants, both documented and undocumented. I want to quickly point out that right now, a lot of us are going through a difficult time because of COVID, and thankfully, the US government has provided some sort of aid to citizens, but at the same time, we need to keep in mind that undocumented immigrants are not entitled to those same supports. There are some states that are having talks about possibly extending aid to undocumented immigrants, but the bottom line is that they're not entitled to these services. So right now, something that you can do is provide, again, donations to those organizations that are helping undocumented immigrants. Something else that you can do is that you can educate yourself about current pending legislative issues affecting immigrant families and call your elected officials frequently. Additionally, you can become familiar with immigrant rights and help educate others. You can also support practical, humane immigration policies that consider the needs of immigrants and asylum seekers. And finally, you can volunteer your time to an organization which serves immigrants. You can utilize any skill sets you have, serve as a translator or interpreter, assist with paperwork, making copies, and so on. The resources available, there are a few resources that are currently available to both undocumented and documented individuals, and here I have highlighted a few. And I will also provide Diana with a list of resources and therapists across the United States that provide either sliding scale or pro bono services, so that is available to you. Okay, so the conclusion. What are the key takeaways from this presentation? Again, undocumented individuals and their families face various stressors. Like I talked about, they don't have access to everything that we have access to, like education, scholarships, medical care, health care, dental care, and so on. They have limited opportunities in terms of employment. And they face many other stressors, which of course has a negative impact on mental health. And it's not only an impact on them, but it's an impact on their families as well. So what does this mean? This means that there is a growing need for the Latinx immigrant population. What I found is that there are many wonderful organizations that advocate for immigrant rights, that provide free legal services, and help link them with resources in the community to meet their basic needs. But what I have found is that there aren't many organizations that provide either free or low cost mental health services. And I was talking about that with colleagues, and I think that's because it's not really considered a basic need, just because it could be because of the stigma, or because there are other more pressing matters like maybe food, healthcare, but their mental health needs are evident, and this is something that, again, is a growing need for them. And for that reason, I do want to urge, if you're a mental health therapist, you're a practitioner, or maybe you're a grant writer, or you work in community organizations, to think about the need for this population, and to possibly provide either free services, sliding scale services, or try to incorporate this in your organization, because there is a very big need in the community, and we can all play a role in trying to close that gap and provide these services. That's the end of my presentation. I hope that this was informative and helpful. Diana, I don't know if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, I do have a question. You talked about individuals who may be experiencing stress, from their status. What can you leave a tip maybe that they might be able to do, or something they can incorporate into their lives to help with that stress?
Yes, okay. So one of the things that participants spoke about that really helped them is to talk about the stress, to process the stress. Again, it would be very helpful if individuals could go into therapy, but I know that that's not an option for everyone. So something that they can do is that if their families are a source of support, then speaking about it and processing it with their families. If not, then reaching out to someone that they trust, that they feel comfortable with, that they can talk to, and processing these concerns. That's something that participants said were very helpful. Something else that they mentioned was helpful was just keeping themselves informed. I do want to say that, especially during COVID times, there is a fine line, and to inform yourself, but also keep in mind moderation, because sometimes we don't even realize it, but we're spending a lot of time on social media, watching the news, and that can also negatively impact us. So just walking that fine line where you are getting informed, but at the same time, not spending so much time hearing about the same thing. Also being careful of where you get your information from. So going to trusted sources that you know are giving you accurate and reliable information. Those are some of the ways that you can deal with the stress.
So I think that's great.
Those are more so practical tips versus mental health techniques. But those are some of the ones that participants talked about, that's what they do in their lives with their families, with friends, and it's something that really helped them.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jarquin. We really appreciate your time and spending this time with us, educating us on some of these very important topics.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here and to speak to you all about this topic.